Hi, I'm Naomi Murphy, and this is the Locked Up Living podcast, where we talk with a wide range of people about harsh aspects of institutional life.
We also explore some of the ways to overcome them and to grow and develop. I'm David Jones. So join us every Wednesday morning, 6 o'clock UK time, for a fresh podcast.
So today we're meeting with Eppie Sprung. Eppie is the founder of Next Chapter Scotland, a charity that aims to support people who've been involved with the criminal justice system to navigate the stigma and discrimination they can face. Eppie has a conviction for a sexual offence herself, and so lives with the impact of that criminal record day in, day out. And she's also mum to two 5-year-olds. And Eppie has recently published a children's book to support people to talk to their children about things that have happened in their past that are still impacting on their lives today. And we're really pleased you could join us, Eppie. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Hi Eppie, very nice to meet you. So you've got twins, have you?
They're not twins. I have a daughter and my husband has a son. So they're both 5 years old. They're 6 months apart in age. So yeah, it's wonderful. It's like having twins, but just part of the time. It's wonderful.
So tell us, Eppie, what's your book about and what led you to write it?
Yeah, so the book basically is the story of an adult and a child having a conversation about something that has happened in the adult's past that they look back on and maybe regret, maybe acknowledge wasn't ideal at the time, but it's still impacting on their life today. And so the conversation between the adult and the child is about how it's impacted on their life and how they want to be able to move forward in the world and sort of, carry on living as a, contributing member of society and the person, the significant person to the child, of course, as well, because it kind of touches on the relationship between the two characters. So what led me to write it? So as you've touched on already, I have a conviction for a sexual offence. So I was a teacher and I had an affair with a 17-year-old pupil. And that was just over 12 years ago. So I was very conscious when I was pregnant with my daughter, I was really conscious that this was something that was undeniably something we were going to have to deal with. My circumstances have had quite a lot of press coverage over the years, a lot of tabloid media coverage. And so there was never the possibility that it could be hidden away. And actually, that's not my personality. It's not what I would have chosen to do anyway, but there was no chance of that. So I knew I was going to have to tackle it head on. So I was an English teacher. So my instinct was go and look for a storybook. There must be something out there that's going to help me with this conversation. And I went looking and I could find books that were supporting people whose parent was in prison. Wonderful books for children who've seen their parent arrested, but nothing that really fit my circumstances, nothing that was something from a long time in the past, but still something that very much needed to be talked about in the present. And I was like, well, better do something about that then, hadn't I? I actually wrote the book in about 10 minutes. I just literally wrote it. It just kind of, just flowed out as these things do when it's something you're passionate about. And then I took it to this spectacular artist, Kathy, who is the illustrator of the book, who I'd never met, but I reached out to her on a recommendation. And I said, what do you think? And of course, I can't speak for Kathy, but she must have been a bit like, oh goodness, like this person with a conviction for a sexual offence is contacting me about a children's book. You couldn't really get more out there than that suggestion. But she read the book and she met me and she said, this is not about a conviction and a sexual offence or even just anything within that sphere. She said, this is about anyone that has things in their past that they, really regret or like don't feel very proud of, or maybe just wish were different, wish had a different outcome. So then, although the text hasn't changed at all, the back cover of the book has broadened quite significantly and basically says, this is for anyone with something in their past that impacts on their life today. And hopefully it brings the opportunity for conversations with like compassion and love and understanding, whatever it might be that you're worrying about talking to the child about, hopefully this will help to like spark that conversation somehow and give you some in terms of like the language and the words that you might be able to, you know, choose to use to have the conversation.
Thank you. So would you say then that it's aimed at anyone who's been subject to acute shame or shaming?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is one way that you might describe it. I think on the back cover of the book, it mentions a criminal conviction. It uses the example of addiction, and the other example it uses is family estrangement, partly because they were the examples that I thought of at the time. But yeah, I mean, anything that has led an individual to feel that there are things that they regret, that they that maybe caused harm. I mean, that's part of the story, is that the adult is acknowledging that they hurt other people, that they caused harm. And of course, that can be in a whole spectrum of ways. But yeah, really anyone that has something that they want to talk to their child about in a, you know, in a loving way, but in an honest way, you know, that doesn't hide things, that says this happened, this shouldn't have happened in the way it did, but I still love you, you know, and that's not going to affect our relationship.
Great. It does sound very interesting. I mean, as I listen to you, Eppie, it does sound like you must have gone through some terrible times. So what is it like to live with the label of being a sex offender, particularly for a woman, perhaps?
Yeah, so it is definitely hard. Definitely hard. There are lots of hard things about it. I think that I founded a charity. So, as you mentioned, the charity Next Chapter Scotland, and that works with all sorts of people that have all sorts of convictions for different offences. And a lot of that involves people who are labelled stigma and experiencing what that feels like to be discriminated against, to have like the internalized stigma and the way that you feel about yourself affected, and also to have yourself kind of presented in the media in a particular way, and to have the challenge of thinking about how everyone else is thinking about you. So not even how you think about yourself, but how the world is viewing you. And yeah, a lot of that is really, really difficult. One of the interesting things I think about being a woman, specifically with a conviction for a sexual offence, is that in our society, we have this tendency to view women in a specific way, you know, this kind of stereotypes of what a woman should be like. And I think it's fair to say that one of the things that happens when someone commits an offence like mine is that it suddenly is like this like fallen woman type, you know, view. And all of a sudden your identity becomes tied to that. So my particular offence, you know, I lost a significant piece of my identity because I was a teacher, and then all of a sudden I was not a teacher. And for me, being a teacher was actually very core to my identity. You know, I loved it, very core to who I was. And so I lost that. And so then I had this like new identity, this label, and I had to navigate that, really kind of challenging thing around the world and the way that people view women and the way that you can sexualize a woman if they've committed a sexual offence, as if there's a sort of justification for then sort of transposing all sorts of other sexualized things onto that individual. And that's really, really hard. I mean, I've had stalkers, I've had people like porn directors offering to, you know, pay me to take part in porn. I've had, you know, obviously people talking about raping me. This kind of spectrum of like really like sexualized stuff, which is really, really hard to deal with. But then I became a mum. And what was great was that sort of all of a sudden, like my sort of master identity like shifted again. And it's different now because it's stronger than, you know, the mum identity is actually more powerful. And maybe it's because I'm so many years down the line as well. I mean, I'm 12, almost 13 years down the line. So I'm sure it's different for people when they're much closer to the conviction. But for me, you know, the mum identity has kind of replaced that. And it's so nice. It's really liberating. You know, it's really liberating to have that as the main bit of who you are as a person now, as opposed to the everything that's tied up with the sexual offence. But there's and also I guess I should say is that, of course, one thing that as a woman I never experienced, which men, I think, probably more consistently do experience, is I never really experienced anyone being scared of me. And I'm glad of that. I don't know what that would have felt like, but that's never been a part of my, my experience. And I'm pleased for that, at least.
Thank you. So, obviously you can't go back to your former career, which, as you said so eloquently, represented such a large part of your identity. And you mentioned the charity and you mentioned being a mum, both of which I imagine take up quite a bit of time and energy. Do you do anything else?
Yeah, well, so my day job, after a short spell of working in a bar after my conviction, I then got involved with supporting charities. So that's kind of what I've then done as my profession since. So I work as a business growth consultant and I help charities to set up and to grow. And it's actually that led me to set the charity up, because of course I noticed this gap. There's a wonderful organisation in England and Wales called Unlock, who support people with a criminal record. And I found them very helpful. But I realised there was this gap in Scotland. And I thought, well, I've got my professional expertise, I've got my lived experience. And I really, again, I kind of come back to the kids. I was very conscious that the kids were going to have to deal with my, past. And I felt like, wasn't it better that if they have to deal with it, at least they know that I'm doing what I can to create good from it? So that's really what Next Chapter is about. Next Chapter Scotland is about, saying something bad may have happened in the past. You may have done something that was not great and that did hurt people, but there are still things you can contribute to the world, and you still have value and you still, your life has worth. And so a big part of it is about, sending that message out there. So I was able to use my kind of skills in my day job and my lived experience and mash them together when we made Next Chapter Scotland. And it's been wonderful. I mean, it's been a real success. The charity is just over a year old and has taken off kind of exponentially, which is great. It's been really, really exciting and satisfying, and I've put a lot of time and effort into it, and it's been wonderful. Really enjoyed the process.
Well, it's good to hear that something so creative has come from such a painful and difficult period in your life. So, looking back, what sense do you make of your actions?
I mean, looking back, one thing I can say from having worked with a lot of other people as well now is that I genuinely believe and know from my own personal experience that none of the actions that lead to an offence like that are rational. That's what I know. So I know that happy, healthy, secure people do not hurt other people. I know that. So I know that if you're going to do those things, it's because you're not thinking rationally. And so if you have, for example, people who, like a gambling addiction, let's say, people don't walk into a bookies and decide that they're going to just, send themselves into so much debt that they lose their house. That isn't something rational, but there is something that happens. So when I think about the steps that led to my offence, there's all sorts of complexity. There's all sorts of complexity within that, but none of it's rational. And so actually trying to kind of put a very rational explanation onto it, I don't think is particularly helpful. I think what's helpful when we talk about people and what led to their offence is, what can we do to support them now? What can we do to help them heal from whatever it was that was leading them to behave irrationally in the first place? And for me, that's the focus. It's about viewing people as human beings who are probably struggling, who have probably experienced trauma, who may have been victims themselves, and thinking about that and thinking about how we can heal. How we can heal so that no one else gets hurt, so that no one else goes on to, reoffend or commits a different type of offence or whatever it might be. So to me, it's, I guess when I look at my own actions, and then I combine it with everything that I hear. I mean, I talk to hundreds of people about this in my work, and everybody is the same. Everybody there's a backstory that meant they made some really poor decisions. And people do that sometimes, and sometimes people get hurt, and, and what we need to think about is what can we do to prevent that happening again, and how can we support people to make sure it doesn't happen again.
As you were talking, Eppie, you reminded me of talking with people who've had addictions where they describe almost going into this sort of single tunneled vision, sort of like a fugue state, a state of dissociation where almost things become unreal and, not recognising the reality of the situation. And I suppose I was wondering, as you were talking, whether anything would have helped you, whether anything could have helped you break that, to shatter it and make reality clearer at that point.
That's a hard one. The answer is I don't know. And it's funny because it's something I've given a bit of thought to recently around how people who've committed an offence can work with professional bodies to try to prevent it happening in the future. I, as an individual, what recommendations could I give to a professional body about what you could do? I think the answer is that probably I could give lots of really useful thought to how you might, what steps you might put in place. I guess one thing that I am confident of, and again, using my particular offence, because that's what we're talking about today, is that there are markers. I have spoken with lots of other people who've committed the same offence as mine. As you can imagine, people reach out to me, and there are markers. There are things that you can see from their past that go through, that are very similar across all of us. And I think that it may be, that's one example of how you might be able to identify people who might be more at risk, more at risk of potentially committing an offence. Not to say that they are going to, but maybe it makes it more likely. And if as, a kind of professional body were looking out for that sort of thing, maybe that would be the kind of thing that might prevent things from happening in the future. But the shame of the situation is that that's not the focus. The focus is not on that. The focus isn't, in fact, it's not on that in any offence type. It's not on asking people why they did what they did so that you can understand how to prevent it. It's on punishing people. That's what the focus is on. And I think a shift towards talking to people, and it's why a big part of the work of Next Chapter Scotland is about raising people's voices up, giving people the opportunity to speak out and to influence. And of course, a part of that is helping to understand what led to an offence happening in the first place. And, going right back to the beginning, right back to childhood, thinking about what all of the things might have been that led all the way up to the offence without any, no justification, no mitigation, no minimization, but just acknowledgement that things happened that led to something else happening. And if we can understand that, we could maybe interrupt it for other people. We could maybe kind of step in and prevent it from happening again.
Thank you. And Eppie, when you were talking about sort of the treatment that you'd had afterwards in terms of the unsolicited interactions with people, it sounds like you've been on the receiving end of a lot of sexualization and a lot of hatred. And I wondered how you'd coped with that.
Yeah, so I guess, again, one of the lucky things, I suppose, is I don't really think I've been on the receiving end of much hatred, actually. I know that men experience that. I know that. But that hasn't been quite my experience. I'm not sure quite what the right word is for it. Judgment, absolutely. Stigma, absolutely. But I don't think I would, I've never feared I was going to be attacked in the street. I've never feared someone was going to graffiti my house. That's never been anywhere, near to my experience. So I'm lucky from that perspective, because that, I think, probably is something that men would experience and would fear. But how have I coped with it? That was your question, wasn't I? How have I coped with it? I suppose I'm very, very lucky that actually during my sentencing, etc., I was required to take part in therapy. And I'm a big believer of therapy. My dad's a counsellor. I'm a big believer in it. And sort of by chance, I ended up being supported by a mindfulness and self-compassion focused therapist. And that was revolutionary, life-changing. So I practice mindfulness through my life, and more practice when it's needed, spend more time doing that when I'm struggling. But the concept of self-compassion and, trying to focus on the things that are within my control as opposed to the things that aren't. I mean, the most challenging thing, though, very recently that's happened is that the media had an impact directly on my daughter. The last time they covered me, the last time they covered me, they came to the house, they took photos, and it had a direct impact on my daughter. And that is the hardest of all of the things that have happened, undoubtedly. And that's sort of a new level of intrusion. And considering how many years later we are, bearing in mind we're more than 12 years on and they're still covering me as if it was yesterday. And so that was really difficult. And I suppose I'm very lucky that I have an incredibly supportive family, support network of friends. I have my colleagues, I have that around me, the board of trustees, all of that is very supportive. And I guess what I have to do is I have to keep my focus on those people. I have to keep my focus on the people that actually, whose opinions actually matter to me, in the purest sense, and try to keep some, distance from the noise that's going on around and about me. There's a woman, you will know, the Brené Brown, the researcher, the woman who does a lot of work on shame resilience. And she talks about vulnerability and the importance of being vulnerable. And of course, I feel like I could be a participant in her research because I feel like I do a lot. I mean, I Next Chapter Scotland has forced me to be vulnerable. This book, talking about this book, that was a decision that I made, and people are probably like, whoa, what a crazy decision to make. But actually, it matters, it matters to me. And I am trying to do everything I can to, live by the values that I believe in, and that demonstrate to everyone that people should be allowed to, live life as a human being with all of their rights respected, etc. So, that's all part of it. And I guess I'm lucky that I am a resilient soul. Let's say that doesn't mean that I don't spend time on the bathroom floor crying, because I do, but most of the time I'm pretty good at getting back up again and carrying on.
Thank you. How do you manage your identity as a parent with this in the background?
So I guess because it's so closely intertwined, what I'm doing for my work, my motivation for doing Next Chapter Scotland and the book is all. And just the way that I live my life, actually, by not hiding the offence, not, talking to the children about it, talking to the school about it, for example. That is also closely tied in with my identity as a parent as well. I believe that if we value things, then we model those things. And I want my kids to know that if they ever do something, if they get in a car drunk and they hit someone, if they do that one day at 18, then I want them to know without a second's hesitation that isn't going to impact on my love for them, my understanding of their worth as a human being. And I think that if I want them to know that, then I have to do that for myself. I have to live that value. And so I guess that's what I spend my time trying to do. I also do a lot of mitigating the impact on them as well, of course. So, for example, prior to my daughter starting school, have met with ed psych, so educational psychologists, have met with obviously the head teacher, have thought about her access to the internet in a school setting. There's all sorts of very practical things that I've done as well to, do what I can to wrap the children in bubble wrap, and kind of protect them from it. But at the same time, having open, honest conversations with them about it, and, introducing the concept of me having been arrested, and then giving them the opportunity to ask questions and answering those questions as honestly as I can in age appropriate, terms, because it's not easy to find age appropriate terms for you were caught having sex in a car. There's a whole kind of sensitive thing around that, and working out the way to talk to them about that. I'm doing my best to be led by them and being honest as much as possible so that it never feels like it's something kind of hidden away. And I think that's all part of that wider picture for me.
You obviously put a lot of thought and, I guess, love into, protecting your children, in terms of this being your motivation for writing the book. What's it like for children when they don't have that level of protection, to cope with discovering on the internet information about their parents? Do you have any sense of that?
I suspect awful. It isn't something that I have any working knowledge of. It isn't something that anyone's ever yet come to the helpline for Next Chapter Scotland to talk about. Interestingly, my daughter is donor conceived. And so I do know a lot about donor conceived people and how they can feel about having secrets kept from them if they're not told about their kind of origin story. And so I think that it's similar. I think that if you were to keep a secret, if you were to hide it, I think then when it comes out, there's this potential for, a kind of questioning. Because that is, my ultimate fear, below everything else, is that it will cause the children to question who I am and whether I'm safe for them and whether they can, what our relationship is like and question that. That's my ultimate fear. And of course, if you had a relationship with a parent and then later discovered something at, I don't know, 13 or something, I can imagine that you would be on very, very shaky ground because of the lying, right? I mean, that's almost always what hurts us, isn't it? The secrecy, the lying, that's what really scars people. And so, yeah, for me, that's why I've been motivated to make sure that isn't something that I'm having to deal with the kids. The kids, we've talked to them about it from really early on, specifically to avoid that, because I can imagine it would be awful, be horrendous, I'm sure.
Yeah, and as you say, that's a nice parallel of the donor conceived children
Yeah,
and also adopted children. Obviously, the stance has been changed from families being left to deal with it and some of them not revealing it, and then people being quite traumatised by discovering, as opposed to this policy now of making sure that children know that from the start.
exactly.
Some people might feel it's distasteful for you to be writing a children's book. I wondered, that's some. I mean, you've mentioned that, is it Kathy, the illustrator, had.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I mean they might. I'm not naive to the coming headline of, sex offender rights children's book, right? I mean, there's no getting away from that. But I guess there are lots of things in life that some people might not like, and that's not necessarily a reason not to do it. I feel that this book will help people. I think that from the people that have seen it already, prior to publication, I think people think it's really helpful and think that it will help people to have conversations. And I think that it is a shame that there will be some people that won't open it, that won't even look at the story because it was written by me. And that is a shame. And it's sad. I think it's really sad. But I hope that those people don't ever need to use this book. I hope that, I hope they never have to have a conversation that's really hard with their kids. And I hope that if people do, then they can see past. I suspect that anyone that has had an experience that they need to talk to their children about probably are able to see past my offence and able to see that actually, there's value in the message, there's value in the story, regardless of who happened to pen it. Fingers crossed.
Thanks very much, Eppie. As you've been talking, I'm thinking there's really a place to have a conversation or a debate, really, about boundaries. All of us meet boundaries and back away from boundaries, cross boundaries every day of our lives, really. And yet, some kinds of boundary breach attracts, particular kinds of scorn and hatred. And you were mentioning earlier on how men seem to attract a lot more hatred than women in these circumstances. So I'm not saying we need to do that today, but it raises interesting questions in my mind. But moving on from that, how do you look after your own well-being?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess like lots of people do, I've got my family, I've got my kids, I love my music, you know, I practice mindfulness. I love nature, you know, all of the things that, you know, that people do to look after themselves. Thankfully, you know, thankfully I'm enough years down the line that I'm far from the initial, you know, depression and anxiety and everything that followed my, you know, my actual conviction, you know, that I'm a long, long way from there now. And it feels to me like knowing that I'm helping other people, you know, people talk to me about the very nature of putting myself out there, how that helps them, how that helps them feel that little bit braver, how it helps them feel that little less need to hide, slightly less shame. And that's wonderful, you know, long may that last. And yeah, I think, like, as I say, like everyone else, I'm just so lucky that I have all the people around me that I have, and the kids and my husband and my family. You know, I'm very, very well supported, and not everybody has that, you know, not everybody has that. So I'm incredibly lucky that I do.
And where can people find your book, Eppie?
So they will be able to buy the book on the website Here With You. The book's called Here With You, and the website is herewithyoubook.co.uk. And I should mention that all of the so the book itself, I've funded the book, I've paid the illustrator, printed, etc. And anything that's made from the book will be either used to provide free copies to organisations that are supporting people that might be going through something similar, and also will be being donated to Next Chapter Scotland. So if there's any money, you know, if anyone buys it, the money will be going to a good place. It's not going anywhere near my own pocket.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on and talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks very much indeed, Eppie.